Well, President Carter died yesterday, and I wanted to give my own statement, or I guess eulogy, because I don't think a lot of the other people that are talking about him are going to be able to do it the way I would like to see it done. Um, so, Carter was born in 1924. He was in the Naval Academy. Following his father's passing, he went to go work on his farm. He entered politics and eventually became governor of Georgia, where he was one of these like new Southern governors that was in favor of racial equality, which was a big deal because when he took office in the early 70s as governor, it was not even 10 years after President Johnson had signed the Civil Rights Act, and there was that whole like debate in the South of how much to follow it, how much you could do to ignore it. So it was during a period of great change within that section of the U.S. So after the Democrats were annihilated in the 1972 election, and then 2 years later Nixon resigned, Carter entered the Democratic primary, or announced he was entering it at the end of that same year, so about 3 or 4 months after Nixon's resignation. And at the time, he was not well known. He was the governor of a state that was it's not one of the biggest ones, so it's not really as talked about as somewhere like California or Texas or New York. But through a combination of an insurgent campaign running against people who really were either crippled themselves, like George Wallace, by his shooting during the 1972 primary, or people being there who were expected but just opted out, like Ted Kennedy. He was able to get the nomination, and during a tight general election campaign, narrowly defeated Ford to get his what would end up being his only term as president, and also become the U.S.'s third president in 4 years, which is really crazy to think about. Or I guess 3 years rather. Um, his term, right, in domestic affairs, I'd say the biggest accomplishment was the establishment of the education and energy departments. Now, a lot of conservatives to this day still complain about the education department, but as Carter, emphasized, it was to give the issue of education the national priority that he believed it needed. Um, and it is unfortunate that after 40 years of it existing, they're still calling for it to be terminated as recently as this past election cycle. It's really out of this world. The energy department, I'd say, is also a big deal, but I don't I've never been as attached to it as education, because I believe education is very important, and it is something that is generally the biggest tool to get people out of their economic status. Whether that's through getting a degree or some other professional paperwork or moniker. In foreign affairs, his emphasis was on human rights. This is after, of course, who could forget that when he started his term, it was by pardoning all of the Vietnam draft dodgers, which instantly won him a lot of goodwill from Americans who did not want to participate in the disastrous Banana War. And in the years that followed, human rights was his main priority. Pretty much with all these different countries, he tried to have some diplomatic relations with them. He had the SALT Treaty, of course, with the Soviet Union. Iran, I'd say, is likely the one that people most remember because it leads to the taking of the 52 hostages and Carter's attempts to negotiate their return for a year, which in recent years, it's been more and more stated by either documents or people that were there at the time that this was done by Iran, and then on possibly even with the participation of some American politicians, as a way of sinking Carter's chances of winning a second term. But yeah, Iran would ultimately keep the hostages all the way up until the exact end of Carter's term, or like right as it ended, as Reagan was being sworn in. And that's another part of this that's so sad. You have this president who doesn't get along that well with Congress, a Democratic Congress, mind you, but still tries to do things. And because of a situation, and I think factors that were predetermined, like inflation was already going to happen due to the 73 75 period. And that is something that tends to get handed down from president to president, the economic conditions that they leave the country in. But because of inflation, which was something that started before he took office, but because of his wanting for the Iranians to release the hostages without anyone dying, which he did succeed in doing, all of this played a role in him not only losing to Reagan in that primary, but also in that general election, excuse me, but also getting primaried by Ted Kennedy, who, again, it's like the road to the path to hell is always paved with good intentions. They originally got along pretty well during Carter's, I'd say, first year and a half, but Carter's refusal or unwillingness to go along with Ted Kennedy's national health care insurance program, which was basically their attempt to do single payer health care, or as Sanders would call it, Medicare for all, back in the 70s, played a role in deteriorating their relationship. And with Kennedy's at that point 10-year assumption of he will run for president one day, it all just played into further messing up Carter. And I will say, I don't agree with not doing single payer, but I do think it's worth pointing out that at that time there were only 10% of Americans who didn't have health insurance through Medicare or Medicaid or some private plan. So because we didn't have some big huge 30, 40, 50% of people without health insurance, which has become the case in subsequent decades. I'm more open to seeing his perspective of, okay, this is something that we could do, but it's not of the most urgency to address all of these different, it's not a priority because it's not affecting most people. Like if you came out today and said only 10% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck instead of the 60+% that we have today, I would say it's not good, but it's not, if most of us are still doing well, then that's what we can expect. There's always going to be someone that falls through the cracks. That's probably how Carter interpreted it. But his term, ends after one 4-year period, and he goes back to Plains. Unlike pretty much all of his successors who have, entered that period of being a former president, he does not try to monetize the office. He writes multiple books, and it's within a few years of being out of office that he founds the Carter Center. He starts teaching at Emory University. Of course, they have his library eventually get made before Reagan's term is up. I think in 86, 87, around about midway through Reagan's term. And I'd say the thing most notable about that period is him monitoring elections in other countries, getting rid of Guinea, that worm disease, which was a more recent thing, happened the last, I'd say 12 years or so. And really just, his time out of office, I'd say was the most influential of any American president besides maybe Theodore Roosevelt before him. That's about it has been a direct, basically pretty much anytime you see an ex-president go to another country to meet with some foreign leader or to try and do something relating to helping people, it's usually having to do with what Carter did after office with Habitat for Humanity. And sure enough, after his passing, you had a lot of these different people mention hey, he made my house. He made some over here in California, for example, a state that he didn't win either time, which just shows you how above the fray he really was. And I guess what I'm a little saddened by when it comes to his tenure out of office is that it's so influential and impactful and, long lasting. I mean, he was the first president to ever have 40 years of a retirement, that a lot of people tend to downplay his actual tenure as president, when in fact, much of the groundwork for his retirement was laid there, where you have that desire to see human rights, be the focus of foreign policy. And of course, he's, I believe, the first, for at least former presidents, or at least like of presidents, either when they're in office or out of office, to go to Cuba since Calvin Coolidge. I know he goes there in like early 2000s, and then Obama would eventually go there in 2016. Um, but you get the idea that it's really sad to see someone who, like, a lot of people get used to these statements and these thoughts. They don't really think, oh, Carter wasn't a good president. It's like, well, I wouldn't say any of the ones that came after him were either. I think he was okay. I think he was all right. I think that he has multiple achievements, and truthfully, his passing now means that there are no living presidents that I like. He was the last one, and some of that was policy related. Some of that was just a general morality. I mean, when you have a man who is elected to the highest office in the land, and they step down from this, and they still retain enough humanity to go around and building houses for people and trying to monitor elections in other countries so people can get a taste of democracy as well, and fighting diseases that kill people. I guarantee you this: Obama, Clinton, Bush, Trump, Biden, these people could all live 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years after leaving the White House. And you will not see any of them going around building houses for anything more than just like a photo op. The fact that Carter and his wife did that for many years after he left the White House is just a testament to the consistency of him. And, we could also talk about the Sunday school teaching that he would do sometimes. Of course, by the time I eventually was able to get down to Georgia, he was that was while he was in hospice care last year. But that's another thing where you don't see that kind of public engagement, that willingness to still be an approachable person from any of his successors. You don't see it. They go and they hide in their bunkers. They come out for fundraisers. The money that Carter made would go to his library. It is a real testament to a man that you go and, again, you're president, you retire, and you live in the exact same house that you were in before. There's no change. And that was a purposeful thing done by him. He could have gone around and given paid speeches like Ford and Obama and the rest of them, but he didn't. Um, and I really, it's so fun to watch a lot of these successors of his and various Democratic Party figures, and probably even some Republicans too, like, talk about him, like when they put out their statements, yesterday, and I'm sure today as well. Oh, he was such this, because honestly, the way that U.S. politics is designed, it's, in the 40 years since he retired from the White House, you really are not going to have anyone like that, at least in the near future, and possibly ever again. Um, Politicians nowadays are made to take positions based off whoever gives them the most money. Politicians nowadays do not do anything to assist anyone but them damn selves. And that's why it's comedic that, like, oh yeah, Ivory Tower Obama with his 40-bedroom home is sitting here praising the man that going into his 90s and 100 was building houses for people. That's real comical to me. You got everyone's favorite adulterer Clinton talking about the man who was married for over 70 plus years being a good person. You really did lose a very clear level of morality with Carter's retirement. Like, if you go through any of the presidents after him, there was always some scandal that shows just the rottenness of the person inside. And it's to varying degrees, right? But that's why I said I always, if I did a president ranking, and I'm not probably ever going to do that, Carter would be in the top 20. And some of that would be due to his own accomplishments, which there are, as I've laid out. Some of that would be due to the fact that I just don't think he was anywhere near as destructive as the ones that have come after him. but he would rank in the upper tier, or I guess that second group of tens, because I do think that he was good for the U.S. That in general, if you hadn't have had the few little, like the inflation and the hostage crisis on top of each other, people would have been more accepting of that. And even if his tenure ended with defeat, he left gracefully and still tried to make the most out of the rest of his life, which is something that I don't think most people try to do at all with any period of their existence. Um, so I've been really busy with the Johnson documentary and then the Nixon documentary, and I want to do another part of the FDR one. And over the next few days, I got to vacate from over here, so I'm not really going to have much time to write or do any of the stuff I like to do. But I do want to make a full length documentary on him at some point. I have several books that I cannot show right now. All I can show you is my Carter baseball I got from the Carter Library last year. Um, because I do think his tenure is important. It's really the last time that you get a candidate who like does the whole populist thing and actually means it, like winning. Um, like Trump tries to copy a lot of that same rhetoric, and I've said before that Trump and Carter's terms, like Trump's original term and Carter's term, have a lot of similarities with like starting off with your entire with your party controlling all of government, but then you're not really able to pass that much, and just I can we can go into it in a separate video, but there when you see Trump talk about this, that, or the other, and then you see a lot of his backers and the billionaires behind him, it's all just like a scam and a con. With Carter, that was not the case, and I really believe that we are not likely to see anyone similar to him in that office ever again. Uh, so I I just wanted to give my own statement because, like I said, all the jerks on CNN and all the rest of these networks, they don't want somebody like that having any kind of power again. They want people who bend the knee to Citibank and want to bomb all these random countries that no American probably ever heard of before, um, and want to cut domestic programs, but then increase military spending every year. It's all just nasty and gross. And Carter was from a time where there was actually a government that was trying to help people and people who were in control that wanted to do the best for their fellow man, and that is something I will always respect.